The hall was buzzing with chatter and laughter, the kind that fills a room before a performance begins. People had gathered for the evening event, expecting an ordinary night of music and light entertainment. Chairs were arranged in neat rows, and the faint smell of polished wood mixed with the aroma of freshly brewed tea from the refreshment table. In the corner of the hall stood an old piano. It looked tired. Its once glossy surface was now scratched and worn, and a few of the keys were chipped, some even sticking slightly. To anyone else, it might have seemed impossible to create beautiful music on such an instrument. The young woman stood a few steps away from the piano, her hands pressed lightly against her thighs. She was quiet, almost invisible among the crowd that was eager to see the evening's performers. Her eyes kept darting to the broken keys, and she could feel a nervous flutter in her chest. She knew what everyone was thinking. She could feel their doubt even before they spoke it aloud. Whispers began to float around her. "Can she even play on that thing?" Someone muttered under their breath. Another voice laughed softly. "This is going to be hilarious." It wasn't just the broken piano that made her nervous. It was the way people were looking at her, the way their eyes seemed to weigh her worth. Some faces were curious, some skeptical, but a few were openly mocking. One man, standing close to the front, smirked and said loud enough for others to hear, "That piano matches her talent, broken and useless." His words landed like stones, heavy and cold in her chest. For a moment she froze. The fluttering in her stomach turned into a lump she couldn't swallow down. She wanted to disappear, to melt into the shadows and leave the laughter behind. Her hands twitched slightly as she took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She had faced challenges before, but nothing quite like this. Every performance in her past had been a private one, in her small room with just her music and herself. No mocking eyes, no cruel jokes, no crowd of people waiting to see her fail. She reminded herself of those quiet evenings, where she had learned to feel the music, to let it flow through her fingertips, to lose herself in each note. She looked down at the piano again. Its imperfections were glaringly obvious now. One key was stuck in a slightly depressed position, another made a dull thudding sound that was far from musical. The wood on the side was chipped, exposing rough patches that seemed to reflect the harshness of the world around her. Everyone else saw a broken instrument, but she had learned to see beyond the surface. Music was not just about perfect keys or flawless instruments. It was about feeling, expression, and heart. That thought steadied her, though a small tremor of fear still lingered in her hands. A few people in the crowd leaned forward in their chairs, whispering, pointing, and nudging each other. She could hear the laughter grow louder, sharp with ridicule. Her heartbeat quickened, but she forced herself to breathe slowly. Inhale, exhale, she repeated it. A rhythm in itself, a rhythm she would need for what was coming. The hall seemed to stretch around her, the murmurs blending into a background noise she could almost ignore. She knelt briefly to test the keys, tapping them lightly with her fingertips. Some responded with clear, sweet notes, others with harsh, uneven sounds. She frowned but didn't retreat. Instead, she began to imagine the music that could come from this piano. She pictured a melody that rose gently, dipped softly, and held the audience's attention even if the notes were imperfect. It didn't have to be flawless. It had to be real. And in that moment, she promised herself it would be. The mocking man stepped closer, clearly enjoying the show. "Don't hurt yourself trying," he said, grinning. A few others laughed, thinking they were clever. She didn't look at him. Instead, she focused on the worn keys in front of her, visualizing the melody she had practiced over and over in her small room. Her fingers itched to touch the keys, to let the music pour out and fill the hall. Her mind drifted back to the countless evenings she had spent alone with music, the quiet moments where each note had been a friend and a comfort. The piano in her home was old too, not nearly as fancy as those seen in recital halls. But in those evenings she had learned something crucial. Music comes from the soul, not the instrument. It had taken her years to understand, and now she had to trust herself in front of dozens of strangers who doubted her every move. She took another deep breath. She could feel every eye in the hall on her. She could feel the weight of judgment pressing down like a heavy cloak. Her fingers hovered just above the keys. Time seemed to slow. She felt small, almost invisible. Yet in that smallness was a spark of courage she had carried with her through every difficult day. She reminded herself that this was not just about the piano. It was about proving something to herself, about showing that even in the face of doubt, even with a broken instrument, she could create something beautiful. A sudden silence swept through the hall as the whispers died down for a moment. People were watching now, waiting for the inevitable disaster. The young woman's heart pounded in her chest, but she let it guide her, let it remind her that she was alive and ready. She pressed her fingers gently on the first key. It produced a sound slightly uneven but strong enough to begin. That one note broke the tension just a little, like a small crack in a wall. She paused for a moment, letting the note linger. The crowd shifted, some leaning closer, sensing something unusual. She took another breath, feeling the rhythm of her own heartbeat blending with the rhythm of the piano. Slowly, she placed her hands fully on the keys, feeling the imperfections beneath her fingertips. She didn't focus on the flaws. She focused on the possibilities. Each key, no matter how broken, was a chance to create something real, something alive. Her mind wandered briefly to the people who had doubted her. The mocking man, the whisperers, the snickering faces, they all mattered less now. She had learned long ago that those who doubt do not define her. Only she could define the music, the emotion, the story she was about to tell. The hall seemed to shrink around her as she gathered courage. Each heartbeat a drum of determination. The tension in the room was almost tangible. Every person waiting for her to fail was holding their breath, expecting the worst. Yet she felt a strange calm settle over her, a quiet confidence that came from years of private practice, years of believing in something that others couldn't yet see. She reminded herself of every quiet evening she had spent learning, failing, and trying again. Every wrong note, every clumsy attempt had led her to this moment. She pressed her fingers to the keys once more, feeling the slight resistance of the broken mechanism. The piano groaned softly under her touch, a sound that might have seemed harsh to some, but she felt it as an invitation. She was ready to answer, ready to transform the sound into music. The crowd was silent now, the mocking voices replaced by a tense curiosity. Everyone could sense that something was about to happen, something unexpected. Her hands shook slightly, but it was not fear this time, it was anticipation. The anticipation of creating something new, something real. The anticipation of turning a moment of ridicule into a moment of triumph. She pressed down with more certainty, feeling the vibration of the wood, the echo of sound traveling across the room. For the first time, she didn't hear the broken notes. She only heard the possibilities, and in that quiet, expectant moment, she let herself imagine what could come next. She imagined the hall filled with sound, with emotion, with something that would stop people in their tracks. The broken piano was no longer an enemy. It was a partner, imperfect but capable, waiting for her to bring it to life. She took one final deep breath, squared her shoulders, and prepared to play. The hall held its collective breath. The whispers had died, the laughter had stopped. Every eye was on her, every thought in the room focused on the moment before the first note. She let her fingers hover above the keys, feeling the weight of expectation, the pressure of judgment and the thrill of possibility. And then, almost imperceptibly, she pressed down. The sound that came out was small, imperfect, but it was hers. It was the beginning of something. And in that first note, the story of courage, resilience, and the beauty of real music was about to unfold. The first note hung in the air, trembling slightly, but it was enough to catch the attention of everyone in the hall. For a moment, time seemed to slow. The whispers, the sneers, the mocking laughter, all of it paused. People leaned forward instinctively, drawn by something they couldn't yet name. The young woman kept her eyes closed, focusing on the sound and the way it vibrated beneath her fingertips. Her heart was still pounding, but it no longer felt heavy. Instead, it felt alive, like the rhythm of a story about to unfold. She took a small, steadying breath, letting the echo of that single note fade naturally. Her hands moved with care, brushing across the uneven keys, feeling their imperfections yet trusting her own ability to shape the sound. Each key seemed different, some resistant, some softer than others, but she didn't think about that. She thought about the music she had imagined countless times in her room. The melody was alive in her mind, and she only needed to let it flow. The audience remained frozen, waiting. The mocking man at the front of the hall frowned, confused by the way the note lingered in the air. Others glanced at each other, silently acknowledging that perhaps they had been too quick to judge. It was unusual, something unexpected. The young woman sensed their surprise, but she didn't let it distract her. Her focus was entirely on the music, on the story she wanted to tell with her fingers and her heart. She began to play slowly, each note deliberate, almost hesitant, but gradually gaining confidence. The melody wound its way through the room, gentle and soft at first, like a stream flowing through a quiet forest. She allowed herself to feel every vibration, every tone, letting it guide her hands naturally. Her fingers moved carefully over the worn keys, coaxing from them sounds that seemed impossible given their condition. And yet they were there, beautiful, fragile, real. Her mind drifted for a moment to her childhood, to the nights she spent alone practicing. There had been no audience, no judgment, only the comforting presence of music. She remembered the small piano in her home, older than her, with keys that sometimes stuck or produced strange noises. She had spent hours learning to listen to the sound itself rather than the instrument, learning to shape it with patience and intention. It had not been easy, and she had often felt discouraged. But she had learned a secret that night in her quiet room. True music comes from within, not from the perfection of the instrument. The crowd began to notice the shift in the atmosphere. People who had been ready to laugh now leaned closer, curious. There was a hush, almost reverent, that fell over the hall. Some of the older attendees exchanged glances, their eyebrows raised, as if silently acknowledging that they were witnessing something special. Even the man who had mocked her shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The young woman could feel their eyes, but she no longer felt threatened by them. Instead, she felt seen, not in a critical way, but in a way that reminded her that music, when honest, has a power all its own. As she continued, her confidence grew. The melody began to take shape, rising and falling, carrying with it emotion that was almost tangible. Her hands, guided by memory and imagination, danced over the keys, finding places of beauty in the most unexpected notes. She no longer focused on the broken keys as obstacles. Each imperfection became part of the story, adding texture, depth, and uniqueness to the music. The piano was no longer broken, it was alive, singing in its own unusual voice. The audience's reaction grew more pronounced with each passing moment. People sat in stunned silence, some with eyes wide, some with lips slightly parted, all of them caught by the unexpected elegance and emotion in the music. A few older attendees leaned back in their chairs, a look of disbelief on their faces, while others leaned forward, their attention completely captured. There was a subtle energy in the room, one that moved beyond words. One that connected everyone through the shared experience of music. The young woman's mind wandered briefly, imagining the people she had once doubted herself in front of, teachers, neighbors, friends who had questioned her ability. She realized that those doubts had shaped her, but they would not define this moment. She was creating something of her own, something that could not be measured by ridicule or comparison. Every note she played was a statement, a quiet but firm declaration that she belonged here, that her music mattered, and that her heart had a voice that could reach others in ways no words could. As the melody grew, so did the complexity of the music. She allowed her fingers to move more freely, letting instinct guide them as much as training. The broken piano produced unexpected harmonies, some slightly off, some oddly beautiful. She embraced them all. Imperfection, she realized, was part of the magic. The audience, too, seemed to understand this without realizing it. They leaned into the music, absorbing the raw emotion, forgetting about the broken instrument, forgetting about their initial judgments, forgetting about everything except the sound that filled the room. For a moment, she allowed herself to close her eyes completely and listen. The hall was silent except for the music, except for the gentle resonance of the piano. She could feel the vibrations under her fingertips, through her hands, up into her chest. It was as though the piano itself was breathing with her, alive in a way that made all the ridicule and doubt irrelevant. She felt a quiet joy, a sense of freedom that she had not expected to feel in front of so many people. A small smile appeared on her face, almost involuntarily. She could feel the energy of the audience shifting, could sense the surprise and wonder in their expressions. The mocking man had stopped smirking, his arms crossed tightly, and a few people had their hands clasped together, unable to tear their eyes away from her performance. She felt a deep connection to everyone in that hall, a bond created not by words, but by the shared experience of music that was real, flawed, and beautiful all at once. Her mind briefly recalled a memory from her earliest lessons. A teacher had told her once, "Music is not about perfection. It is about truth." She thought of those words now, feeling their weight and their wisdom. Every note she played was truthful. Every vibration carried her intention, her heart, her courage. She realized that in that moment she was not performing for anyone else. She was performing for herself, and the audience could feel it, even if they did not yet understand it fully. As the melody continued, the young woman began to notice small reactions from the crowd. Eyes glistened with emotion, shoulders relaxed. Some people even leaned closer as though trying to absorb every sound more fully. The energy in the room had shifted completely. It was no longer a place of judgment or ridicule. It was a place of shared experience, a space transformed by courage and music. Even the broken piano, with all its flaws, had become a conduit for something far greater than anyone had anticipated. Her fingers moved effortlessly now, finding patterns and harmonies she had not planned, letting intuition guide her through the music. The hall seemed to breathe with her, as though the walls themselves absorbed and reflected it back with warmth. She felt a sense of triumph growing quietly inside her. A triumph not born of applause or recognition, but of the knowledge that she had faced fear and doubt and found beauty anyway. For the first time that evening, she looked up slightly, letting her eyes meet the audience's. The expressions she saw surprised her. They were no longer judgmental. They were attentive, curious, moved, and even in awe. The smirks had disappeared, replaced by faces that reflected the raw power of what she was creating. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but she felt it. She felt the change in the energy of the room, the transformation from ridicule to reverence, and it gave her strength to play even more freely. The music became more intricate, weaving delicate threads of melody that touched the hearts of those listening. Some closed their eyes, letting the sound wash over them. Others held their breath, as though afraid to break the fragile spell that had been cast. The young woman did not notice the audience anymore. She was immersed fully in the music, in the story she was telling with each note. Every hesitation, every imperfect key, every unexpected sound had become part of the narrative. It was living, breathing, and undeniably real. A few people shifted in their seats, trying to whisper to one another, but the words could not compete with the sound. It was bigger than conversation, bigger than judgment, bigger than expectation. The music was telling its own story, one of resilience, courage, and beauty found in imperfection. The young woman's hands moved gracefully, almost like they had a life of their own, guided by years of practice and the quiet determination to create something meaningful despite the obstacles, and through it all, she felt a quiet joy, a lightness in her chest she had never felt in front of an audience before. She realized that the fear she had felt earlier, the tension and doubt, had not disappeared, they had been transformed. They had become fuel for her courage, a reminder that even when faced with ridicule, she could find a way to shine. Each note, each vibration, each imperfect sound was proof that her heart and her music could not be silenced. The hall remained captivated, a collective hush that seemed to suspend time itself. No one laughed, no one whispered, no one judged. They simply listened, letting the music speak for itself. It was a rare moment, a moment when the world outside no longer mattered, and everyone. The first few notes had already captured the hall, but now she was ready to let the music grow, to take the melody further than she had ever dared in front of an audience. Her fingers moved across the uneven keys with newfound confidence, coaxing out sounds that were both tender and strong. Every touch, every press, carried intention. She was no longer thinking about the broken piano or the judgmental crowd. She was thinking only about the music, about the story she wanted to tell through sound. The melody rose gently, filling the hall with a richness that seemed impossible given the condition of the piano. There were stumbles along the way, small imperfections that might have seemed like mistakes to an untrained ear, but she turned each one into part of the narrative. A slightly flat note became a soft pause, a dull thud became a heartbeat, and a harsh key became an accent, giving the music texture and depth. The audience, once skeptical and mocking, leaned in, caught completely by the transformation. The young woman's mind drifted back to the countless nights she had spent alone, practicing in her small room. There had been no applause, no judgment, only the steady presence of music guiding her fingers. Each mistake, each challenge, had taught her something invaluable. Music is not about perfection. It is about truth, about emotion, about connection. And now, as she played in front of strangers, those lessons became alive. She felt them in every note, in every vibration under her fingertips. And she knew that the audience could feel them too. The room had grown quiet. The kind of quiet that feels like everyone is holding their breath. Some people had closed their eyes, letting the sound wash over them, while others sat frozen, leaning forward with anticipation. Even the most skeptical faces were now soft with surprise, their initial ridicule replaced with curiosity and awe. She could sense the change in the energy around her, and it gave her courage. Each note became stronger, bolder, yet still gentle. Like a story unfolding word by word, she allowed the melody to swell, her hands moving more freely as her confidence grew. The broken keys no longer felt like obstacles. They felt like instruments of expression, each with its own voice. She realized that imperfection had become an ally. It gave the music character, personality, and a kind of raw beauty that no perfect instrument could replicate. The audience was no longer watching a young woman struggling with a broken piano. They were watching an artist breathe life into something forgotten, neglected, and underestimated. Her heart raced with a mix of exhilaration and focus. She was no longer thinking about the man who had mocked her, or the whispers that had spread through the room before she began. They existed only in the past. Now, every heartbeat was in sync with the rhythm of the piano, every breath aligned with the melody she was creating. She let herself feel the music fully, letting it guide her hands and inspire her next movement across the keys. The crowd's reaction grew more pronounced with each passing moment. Eyes widened, mouths opened slightly, and some people even leaned forward, unable to tear their gaze away from her hands. They could see the effort, the dedication, and the emotion in her movements. It was impossible to ignore the authenticity in her performance. Even the harshest critics were captivated, realizing that talent cannot be measured by appearances or circumstances. The young woman was proving that with every note, every pause, and every rise and fall in the melody. She allowed herself to close her eyes completely, letting the music flow without conscious thought. Her fingers found patterns naturally, as if guided by some unseen force. She felt a deep connection to the piano, to the sound it produced, and to the people in the room who were now fully present with her. There was an unspoken dialogue happening, her music reaching out to them and their awe, surprise, and attention feeding her courage and creativity. As the melody grew more intricate, she noticed subtle reactions from the audience. Some leaned in closer, as if trying to feel the vibration through the air itself. A few older attendees exchanged glances, nodding slightly in appreciation. The mocking man at the front shifted in his seat, arms crossed tightly, but the smirk had faded. Even those who had doubted her the most could not deny the power and beauty emerging from the broken piano. It was a transformation not just of the music, but of perception. She let her mind wander briefly to the lessons she had learned in life outside of music. Challenges had always been present hardships that made her question herself, obstacles that seemed insurmountable. But music had always been a refuge, a way to turn struggle into expression. Every imperfect key was a reminder that life itself is imperfect, and yet it can be beautiful if we approach it with patience, courage, and heart. This thought gave her a quiet strength, a calm center from which her fingers moved confidently across the piano. The hall was now fully immersed in her performance. People were no longer thinking about what they had expected or what they might say afterward. They were living in the moment, experiencing the music as it unfolded. Some had tears in their eyes, others had small smiles of wonder. The young woman felt it all, feeling the collective heartbeat of the room synchronizing with her own. The broken piano, once a symbol of ridicule, had become a bridge, connecting her to everyone present in a way that words never could. Her fingers danced across the keys, sometimes gently, sometimes with more force, depending on the emotion she wanted to convey. She was painting a picture with sound, crafting a story that only music could tell. She felt each vibration resonate through her hands, her arms, and into her chest, a physical confirmation that she was alive, present, and capable. The imperfections of the piano added a unique character, a texture that made the music feel alive, almost human. She allowed herself to smile softly as she played, not out of arrogance, but out of joy, out of the quiet satisfaction of overcoming fear and doubt. She realized that this performance was not about proving anyone else wrong. It was about proving to herself that she could trust her ability, her instincts, and her heart. Every note, every chord, every pause was a celebration of that realization. The audience continued to respond without words. Their silence was filled with emotion, with awe, and with a shared sense of witnessing something extraordinary. The young woman could feel it like a pulse through the room. She felt connected to everyone there, not as strangers, but as participants in the creation of beauty. It was a rare experience, one that transcended judgment, expectation, and even the physical imperfections of the piano. She let the melody flow freely now, improvising slightly, trusting the music to guide her. Some notes surprised even her, but they fit perfectly within the story she was telling. The broken keys no longer mattered, they were no longer obstacles. They were instruments with their own voice, contributing to the narrative, making the music richer and more compelling. Every sound, every vibration carried emotion that was palpable in the room. The energy of the hall continued to shift. The audience leaned in, completely captivated. The people who had mocked her before were silent, unsure of what to say or how to react. Their doubt had been replaced by something else, respect, wonder, even a little awe. The young woman felt it, but she did not let it distract her. She stayed in the moment, letting the music guide her, letting the emotion flow naturally through her fingertips. Her mind wandered again to the lessons of life, that challenges are not barriers but opportunities, that ridicule and doubt can be transformed into motivation, and that true strength comes from within. Each thought strengthened her confidence, her ability to shape the music, and her connection to the audience. She realized that this performance was more than just music, it was a statement of resilience, courage, and the power of human expression. As the melody reached a particularly tender section, she felt a quiet tension in the room. People were leaning forward, eyes glistening, completely absorbed. Some were holding their breath, as if afraid to disturb the fragile beauty of the moment. She let herself feel their attention, their awe, and allowed it to feed her confidence. Each note became a message, a conversation with the audience, a bridge between her heart and theirs. The broken piano, with all its imperfections, had become a part of the story. Its flaws added depth, texture, and character to the performance. The young woman realized that she had transformed the instrument from a symbol of ridicule into a vessel for beauty and emotion. The audience, too, had been transformed. They were no longer critics, they were witnesses, participants in a shared experience that transcended words and expectations. She let the music swell and fade, rise and fall, carrying emotion with each movement. Her fingers moved with grace, precision, and feeling, finding beauty in the most unexpected places. Every vibration, every chord, every imperfect note told a story of courage, persistence, and creativity. The audience felt it, understood it, and responded in kind, their silent appreciation filling the hall with an energy that was almost tangible. The young woman's heart raced with excitement and joy. She felt alive in a way that was rare and precious, fully immersed in the creation of something meaningful. The music flowed through her effortlessly now, a natural expression of her spirit and her experience. She no longer noticed the broken keys, the skeptical crowd, or the mocking voices. There was only the music, the connection, and the story unfolding under he. The young woman's hands moved over the piano keys with confidence now, every note deliberate, every chord filled with emotion. The melody had grown richer, more complex, yet still gentle and sincere. The hall was silent, the kind of silence that feels almost sacred. No one dared to speak, not even the people who had mocked her before. Everyone was holding their breath, caught completely in the spell she was weaving. She felt a wave of emotion rise inside her. It was a mixture of relief, joy, and determination. She had faced the fear of ridicule, the pressure of expectation, and the weight of doubt, both from herself and from others. Now each note was a triumph, a statement that she was not defined by the opinions of the crowd or the imperfections of the piano. Her fingers moved with grace, coaxing sound from the old, broken instrument as if it were an extension of her own heart. The melody began to climb, rising like a soft wind lifting leaves into the sky. Her hands moved faster, but not hurriedly. Every movement was intentional, every note precise in its emotion. She let herself feel each vibration as it traveled through her fingers, up her arms, and into her chest. The music was no longer just sound. It was feeling, it was expression, it was a story unfolding in real time. The audience sat frozen, captivated. Some had their eyes closed, letting the sound wash over them. Others leaned forward, their faces softened by awe and admiration. Even the man who had mocked her earlier could not hide his astonishment. His arms, once crossed defensively, now hung loosely at his sides. He stared at her hands moving across the piano as if he were seeing something impossible. People around him whispered softly, not in mockery, but in wonder. They could feel the power of the music, the depth of feeling, and they had no choice but to pay attention. She allowed herself to close her eyes completely, letting intuition guide her fingers. The broken keys produced sounds that were unexpected, but she welcomed them. Each imperfection added character, texture, and emotion to the music. She embraced every flaw, turning it into an opportunity to make the melody more human, more alive. The piano was no longer broken in her hands. It was transformed. It was singing in its own voice, and the audience could hear it clearly. Her mind wandered for a brief moment, thinking about the countless nights she had spent alone practicing. There had been moments of frustration, tears, and self-doubt. Sometimes the music did not come out the way she had imagined. Sometimes she had wanted to give up, but each struggle had been a lesson, a step forward, a reminder that resilience was stronger than fear. She realized now that all of those nights had led to this very moment, when she could pour everything she had learned into one performance and touch the hearts of others. The music swelled, filling the hall completely. It was soft in one moment, strong in the next, carrying with it every emotion she had ever felt: fear, hope, sadness, joy, and determination. The broken piano responded in kind, producing sounds that were imperfect but beautiful, raw and honest. She let her hands glide over the keys, sometimes hesitating for effect, sometimes pressing firmly to emphasize emotion. Each choice, each movement told a part of the story. The audience was mesmerized. No one moved, no one whispered, no one laughed. They were fully present, absorbing every sound. Some were visibly moved, tears glistening in their eyes. Others had a soft, almost awed smile, as if they were experiencing something rare and precious. The room had shifted completely. The mocking energy that had been present before was gone, replaced by a shared sense of wonder. People had forgotten the broken piano, the judgment, and the ridicule. All that mattered was the music and the person creating it. She felt a surge of courage and freedom. She was no longer playing to prove herself to anyone else. She was playing because she needed to, because the music demanded it, because it was the truest way to express herself. Her hands moved faster now, but with control and precision. The melody rose and fell like waves on a gentle ocean, carrying everyone in the room with it. Every note, every pause, every chord resonated with the audience. It was as if the hall itself had become part of the music, alive with emotion and energy. The young woman's breathing was steady, her mind focused, yet her heart felt light. She could feel the attention of everyone in the room, but it no longer weighed on her. Instead, it fueled her, gave her energy, and pushed her to create even more. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, the doubts, the ridicule, the challenges, and realized that each step had been necessary. Without the struggle, the triumph would not feel so profound. Her hands danced across the keys, exploring higher notes, delicate chords, and surprising harmonies. The audience gasped softly at the beauty of it, unable to contain their amazement. Some leaned forward, eager to hear every nuance, every subtle change in tone. Others closed their eyes again, letting the music speak to them in a language beyond words. The young woman felt the connection, felt the hearts of the audience responding to her own. And it gave her a quiet thrill that made her smile. The broken piano, once a symbol of ridicule, had become a partner in her performance. Its imperfections added a unique character that no perfect instrument could provide. Each sound carried a story, a little quirk that made the music human, relatable, and emotionally powerful. She realized that the audience was not just hearing music, they were feeling it. They were experiencing the journey of a person who had faced fear and doubt and turned it into beauty. As she played, she noticed small gestures from the audience, hands lightly touching their chests, heads tilting in concentration, eyes glistening with tears. They were not just listening. They were participating, letting the music resonate within them. Even the man who had mocked her before seemed moved, his expression softening. It was a silent acknowledgement that he had misjudged her, that talent and heart cannot be measured by appearances. The young woman allowed herself to take a momentary pause, letting the notes hang in the air. The silence was not empty. It was filled with emotion, anticipation, and the unspoken connection between her and the audience. She could feel their collective breath, their shared experience, and it strengthened her resolve. Every note she played after that pause carried more weight, more meaning, more beauty. The melody continued to build, layers of sound weaving together into a complex emotional tapestry. Her fingers moved with precision and fluidity, guided by instinct and the memory of years of practice. The broken piano responded with surprising richness, its flaws enhancing the emotional depth rather than detracting from it. The audience was completely entranced, caught in the spell she had created. Unable to look away or think about anything else, she let herself feel every emotion as she played pride, joy, vulnerability, courage, and allowed it to flow through her fingertips into the piano and out into the hall. Each note became a statement, a confession, a celebration of resilience and authenticity. The music was no longer just hers. It belonged to everyone present. It connected them, heart to heart, in a way that words could never have achieved. The young woman's hands moved effortlessly now, the melody reaching its most powerful section. She pressed the keys firmly, letting the sound rise and fill every corner of the hall. The audience responded with silent awe, some leaning forward, some closing their eyes, all of them fully absorbed. She could feel their presence, their attention, and their emotions. And it added a new layer of energy to her performance. As the final notes approached, she slowed slightly, letting each sound linger, giving it room to breathe. The broken keys produced a warmth and depth that made the melody even more poignant. She played with intention, shaping the music carefully, letting the imperfections tell a story of struggle, courage, and triumph. The hall was completely silent, the audience captivated, hanging on every note, every pause, every subtle shift in tone. When the final note finally rang out, it lingered in the air for a moment, soft and fading. The room stayed quiet, as if no one wanted to break the spell. And then, slowly, a gentle applause began to ripple through the hall. One by one, people clapped, at first softly, then louder, until the entire room erupted in appreciation. The sound was thunderous and sincere, filling every corner, echoing off the walls, and washing over her like a wave of recognition and respect. She allowed herself a small smile, feeling a mixture of relief, joy, and pride. The music had done more than she had imagined. It had transformed the broken piano, the skeptical audience, and even herself. She had taken fear and doubt and turned them into something beautiful. She had proved, not through words, but through music, that courage, heart, and authenticity can overcome judgment and ridicule. The audience continued to applaud. Some standing now, some wiping tears from their eyes, all of them moved by what they had just witnessed. People approached her quietly, offering words of admiration, apologies, and encouragement. The man who had mocked her before stepped forward as well, his expression softened, his voice respectful. It was a moment of connection, of recognition, of shared humanity. In that instant, she realized something profound. The broken piano, the ridicule, the fear, they had all been part of the journey. Without them, the music would not have carried the same depth, the same truth. She had faced the challenge, embraced imperfection, and created something unforgettable. And in doing so, she had reminded. The applause filled the hall, loud and warm. But the young woman remained seated at the piano for a moment, letting the sound wash over her. Her hands rested lightly on the keys, still vibrating from the energy of the music she had just played. The broken piano, which had once seemed like a barrier, now felt like an ally. It had carried her through fear, doubt, and ridicule, helping her transform a moment of potential humiliation into a memory of triumph and beauty. She took a deep breath, feeling a wave of relief and pride that she had never experienced before. Around her, the audience was still clapping, some rising to their feet in a spontaneous standing ovation. Faces that had been skeptical or mocking were now filled with admiration, some showing tears, others smiling with awe. She noticed the man who had sneered at her before. He was clapping, his expression serious, respectful, and perhaps even a little humbled. Others whispered to one another, sharing their amazement and the quiet wonder of having witnessed something extraordinary. The atmosphere had shifted completely from doubt and ridicule to one of celebration and respect. She finally stood, her hands brushing against the piano lightly, as if thanking it for its role in her performance. The audience's applause continued, echoing through the hall. She felt a mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. Her heart was pounding not from fear anymore, but from the sheer intensity of emotion that had flowed through her during the performance. Each note had been a part of her courage, her story, her struggle, and her joy. And now, seeing the reaction of the people who had doubted her, she felt a sense of quiet validation, not from proving them wrong, but from sharing something real and meaningful. People began to approach her, some with soft words of praise, others with smiles of gratitude. One woman said quietly, "I have never heard anything so moving in my life." An older man nodded, shaking his head in disbelief. "You made that old piano sing like I've never heard before," he said. The young woman listened, smiling softly, letting their words sink in. She had not expected such a response. She had only hoped to play from her heart, not to impress or prove herself. And yet the impact of her music had gone far beyond what she imagined. Even the skeptics had changed. Those who had once whispered or laughed now approached her, their expressions thoughtful and sincere. The man who had mocked her earlier said quietly, almost apologetically, I underestimated you. That was incredible." She nodded politely, feeling a sense of closure. There was no anger or resentment in her, only a calm acknowledgement that everyone is capable of underestimating others, and that sometimes courage and talent speak louder than words. The broken piano, once the source of doubt and ridicule, now felt alive. Its imperfections, once glaring and distracting, had become part of the beauty. Each worn key, each stubborn note had contributed to the melody, adding character and depth that no perfect instrument could have achieved. The young woman realized that life is much like this piano, flawed, unpredictable, and sometimes broken but capable of producing incredible beauty when approached with patience, courage, and heart. She took a small step back from the piano and looked around the hall. The audience had quieted, the energy now a warm, collective appreciation. People were talking softly among themselves, sharing their admiration, exchanging smiles, and processing the experience they had just witnessed. It was a rare kind of silence, not awkward or uncomfortable, but full of connection, understanding, and wonder. She felt it too, the invisible thread that tied her and everyone present together through the music. For a moment, she allowed herself to reflect on how far she had come. Just an hour ago, she had been nervous, unsure, and facing the weight of doubt. The mocking, the laughter, the whispers had seemed impossible to overcome. But now, she saw the result of embracing her fear instead of succumbing to it. She had transformed vulnerability into strength, imperfection into artistry, and fear into courage. And in doing so, she had not only changed the audience's perception of her, but also the perception of what a broken piano and, by extension, life itself could produce. She smiled quietly to herself, thinking of all the people who had discouraged her along the way, those who had doubted her talent, her persistence, or even her dreams. None of their negativity mattered now. Their doubts had been temporary. Her courage and music were permanent in this moment. She realized that what mattered was not the opinions of others, but the ability to trust herself, to embrace imperfection, and to create something real from the resources at hand. The audience began to disperse slowly, but many lingered, approaching her individually or in small groups to express their admiration. Some asked questions about her music, some shared their own stories of struggle and triumph, and some simply wanted to offer a quiet word of thanks for the experience. Each interaction reinforced a profound truth. Sharing one's authentic self, even in the face of doubt and fear, can touch others in ways that words alone never could. She noticed a few children lingering near the piano, their eyes wide with curiosity and wonder. They watched her hands as she pressed a few gentle notes, producing the delicate sounds of the instrument. One child whispered to a parent, "I want to play like that someday." She smiled softly, nodding. The thought warmed her heart. The music had not only reached the present audience, but had planted a seed for the future. Her courage, her persistence, and her artistry had inspired more than just admiration. They had inspired possibility. As she stepped away from the piano, she allowed herself to take a breath, feeling the weight of the evening lifting and the exhilaration settling into a quiet sense of accomplishment. The room, once filled with skepticism and doubt, had been transformed into a space of shared appreciation, awe, and emotion. She realized that music is not about perfection, but about connection, courage, and heart. It is about creating something that resonates beyond the individual, touching everyone present, and sometimes even changing perspectives in the process. The old piano stood quietly, its keys still worn, its wood scratched, but now it seemed almost to glow with the memory of the performance. In that moment, it was no longer just an instrument. It was a symbol of what is possible when we embrace imperfection, trust our abilities, and have the courage to act despite fear. She looked at it, feeling a silent gratitude. Without its flaws, the performance would not have carried the same weight, the same character, or the same emotion. Imperfection had made it perfect. People began leaving the hall, still talking quietly about what they had witnessed. She watched them go, feeling a deep satisfaction. The music had done its work. It had touched hearts, changed minds, and created a moment of collective connection that would linger long after the hall had emptied. She realized that, even though the evening was ending, its impact would remain. Not just for her, but for everyone who had experienced it. She reflected on the lessons of the night. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it. Talent is not measured by instruments or appearances, but by heart, dedication, and the ability to touch others. Imperfections are not weaknesses, but opportunities to create something unique and powerful. And the simplest, most authentic actions can leave a lasting impact far greater than anticipated. As she walked away from the piano, she felt a sense of peace. The performance had been more than just notes on a page or sounds from a keyboard. It had been a story, a journey, a moment of truth. She had faced ridicule, fear, and doubt and turned them into beauty. And in doing so, she had inspired, amazed, and moved everyone present. The hall slowly emptied, leaving behind only the echoes of the music, soft vibrations that seemed to linger in the air. The broken piano stood in quiet dignity, a silent witness to the courage and artistry it had helped reveal. The young woman paused at the door, looking back one last time. She felt a quiet pride and an even quieter understanding that this was not the end of her journey, but a milestone. A reminder that beauty, courage, and heart can shine through any circumstance. Even when the world expects failure, she stepped out into the night, feeling the cool air against her face, the sense of accomplishment and fulfillment settling into her chest. She knew that the memory of this performance, the connection with the audience, and the transformation of the broken piano into something extraordinary would stay with her forever. She smiled softly, a sense of calm and quiet joy washing over her, knowing that she had proven something important not just to the audience, but to herself. No one would forget the evening. The music had done more than fill the hall. It had filled hearts. And in that truth, she found a kind of peace and happiness that no applause, no praise, and no recognition could ever fully measure. She had faced fear, embraced imperfection, and shared her heart, and that, she knew, was the greatest success of all.